the regular meeting of the Calcasieu Parish Police Jury for Thursday, October 20th. We're going to have the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance by Mr. Brame. If everyone would please stand.
Let's pray. Father God, we just love you today. Just thank you for your many blessings that you lay upon each and every one of our lives. We thank you for the opportunity to be here today, Father. We just ask that you give us wisdom and discernment on the decisions we make, and that the decisions we make tonight, Father, please you. We ask this in the precious name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Face the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All Trump supporters.
Roll call, Madam Secretary.
Yes, sir. Mr. Andrepont?
Here.
Mr. Ferris?
Here.
Mr. Brame?
Here.
Mr. Collins?
Here.
Mr. Farnham is out of town, work-related this evening. Mr. Guidry?
Here.
Mr. Guillory?
Here.
Mr. Hunter?
Here.
Mr. Latour?
Here.
Ms. Mayo? Here. Vice President McMillan?
Here.
Mr. Scott?
Here.
Mrs. Trimmy? Here. Mr. White?
Here.
President Landry?
Here.
You do have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Kathy. Before we get started, we ask that everyone please silence their cell phones, and also if you wish to speak on any item that's on the agenda tonight, that you fill out a blue slip. You'll find it at the front of the room there, and turn it in to someone at the staff desk. Item 4, appearance by the Honorable Jimmy Genovese, Third Circuit Court Judge and candidate for the Louisiana Supreme Court, 3rd District. Mr. Genovese, if you would, just please state your name and address for the record, please.
My name is James Thomas Jimmy Genovese. My address is 145 Aspen Lane in Opelousas, Louisiana, 70570. I'm currently a judge on the Louisiana Third Circuit Court of Appeal, representing all of you ladies and gentlemen here of the jury. The matter before the court, if you will, Mr. Landry. Mr. Gilbert, can you take that red jacket off? It's really distracting. Yeah, I've seen that jacket all day today, and I'm going to be seeing that in my dreams tonight. We've got 19 days left, okay, for 19 days left for Mr. Rance, 19 days left for Mr. Francis, 19 days left for Mr. Genovese. And so we're going to make it to the finish line, and this is my last opportunity to see most of you, and I appreciate the opportunity to come before you. You will be called upon to choose a number of items on the ballot November the 8th. You will elect the president, you will elect a senator, you will elect a representative, you will elect the public service commissioner, you will elect your representative on the Louisiana Supreme Court, and you will vote for 6 constitutional amendments. The voting for the Louisiana Supreme Court is going to be 8 parishes: Calcasieu, Cameron, Jeff Davis, Avoyelles, Lafayette, Acadia, Vermilion, St. Landry. I think it's important to repeat that. Lafayette, Acadia, Vermilion, St. Landry, Avoyelles, Jeff Davis, Cameron, and Calcasieu. Calcasieu is 27% of the vote. I need your vote, I need your support, along with my home parish of St. Landry Parish, to try and make sure that I can have an opportunity to serve you on the Louisiana Supreme Court. I am your judge, one of your 12 judges on the Third Circuit Court of Appeal, which covers 21 parishes and 1.2 million people. What I do every day is I review the decisions of the lower courts of 21 parishes and 1.2 million people. I am presently on writ duty as we speak. Why is that important? That is important because what you're voting on with Louisiana Supreme Court is you're going to be voting on a court that is an appellate court. It reviews the decisions of lower courts. That's what the Supreme Court does. There are no cases tried there, no jury trials, none of that. They review the decisions of lower courts. I, as your judge on the Third Circuit Court of Appeal, I review the decisions of lower courts. I review the decisions of those lower courts in 21 parishes. So what the Supreme Court does is what I do. The Supreme Court writes opinions, I write opinions. I've written over 500 legal opinions in the 11 and a half years I've served as your judge on the Third Circuit Court of Appeal. The Supreme Court handles writs. I handle writs. I have handled over 4,000 writs in my 11 and a half years on the Third Circuit Court of Appeal. So what they do is what I do. Why is that important? It is important because the Supreme Court is the highest court of the land. The law of Louisiana is determined by the Supreme Court. So you're going to be electing a person who's going to serve on that court for the next 10 years. And appellate court experience is absolutely essential in that particular position, because what they do is what we do. The Supreme Court is no place for on-the-job training or for a rookie. A person's life, liberty, and property is at stake, and I want you to think about that. Now, if you think that being an appellate court judge is just a piece of cake, which I would think that perhaps maybe my opponent might feel that way, because my opponent is a district court judge. I'm an appellate court judge. I was a district court judge for 10 years, and then I moved to the appellate court for 11 years. So I've been there and done that. But leaving the district court and skipping the appellate court and going to the Supreme Court is something that is not the best practice in law. Because when you have to go to the Supreme Court and you have to deal with appellate court matters and you've never been an appellate court judge, that's going to be a problem. That's going to be a problem, and it's no place for on-the-job training. And the key distinguishing factor between the candidates is this. There are only 2 candidates. We don't have 12 like in the representative race or 24 in the Senate race, just 2. It'll be all over late night, November the 8th. So when you only have 2 candidates like that, what's the difference between the 2? Both are good people. Both are conservative in their own way. Both are judges. And the difference is this. One is a district court judge, and one is an appellate court judge. One has handled appellate review for 11 and a half years, and one has never handled an appellate case. And I just think that that's a real problem when you're thinking about someone's life, liberty, and property for the next 10 years. I think that is an important distinguishing factor. Now, each one of you are public elected officials. And the reason it is important to me is because I'm not asking just for your vote. If you think I am worthy, I would ask for you that people are going to contact you, and they're going to say, I don't know anything about this race. I don't know any of the judges. But you know Jimmy Genovese now. And you know the difference between an appellate court judge and a district court judge. And that's why you can just this one vote, you can affect 100, 500 people. Because you are public officials, and people that don't know they have trust in you. They voted for you. They put you in office. So you are very important to me. I want to share with you my personal belief, and I'm not ashamed of this. I am pro-God. I am pro-life. I am pro-family. I am pro-Second Amendment. Above all, I am pro-justice. I want to share with you my judicial philosophy, because I think it's important that you know the judicial philosophy of the judge. And the judicial philosophy of Jimmy Genovese is this. I've been in law for 42 years, 21 years in the general practice of law in Acadiana, trying to support 5 daughters, and I'm still alive. In the last 21 years, I've been a judge, 10 years on the district bench and 11 years on the appellate bench. My judicial philosophy, and everyone, whether you came before me as a district judge or whether you came before me on the appellate bench, I treat every single one of you fairly and equally. I play no favorites. I give everyone a level playing field. I do not cater to special interests, and I follow the rule of law. I do not legislate from the bench. That's for the legislature to change the law, not for me as a judge. I do not cater to special interest groups. Any judge worth of salt is not going to be guided by any type of special interest groups. That is what is important here. So I'm not going to cater to lobby. I'm not going to cater to big oil. I'm not going to cater to the big foreign corporations. I'm not going to cater to trial lawyers. I'm not going to cater to anyone. Because as a judge, I've got to be fair and impartial. And if you're right, you're right. You're wrong, you're wrong. I want to give you the opportunity to contact me. I know this is not the time and place. You have a lot of things on the agenda. My number, as a public official, I'm not ashamed to give you my number. My number is 94-JUDGE. That's very simple. You don't have to write it down. 337-94-JUDGE. And that would be this particular phone. You can reach me at any time. I represent you. And I'm going to continue to represent you because 2 years ago, in 2014, I was reelected without opposition for a 10-year term. And I'm not young. So 2024, I'll be with you. And I'll be with you every step of the way. And the only question is, if the Lord spares me, I will be your judge on the Third Circuit Court of Appeal, either west on I-10 in Lake Charles, or if you'll favor me with your vote and support, I will represent you east on I-10 in New Orleans. And I can make it a better court in New Orleans. And they need a justice on that court that is fair and balanced and experienced. And I am the only appellate court judge in this race. The choice is clear. If you have a problem, vote for the guy. okay? If you have a problem, you all know Judge Judy. I'm Judge Jimmy, so just to make sure you can recall. I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to address you. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Judge Genovese. Are there any questions from the jury?
Thank you so very much.
Yes,
I
sir.
appreciate it.
Thank you. Good luck to you. Item 5, appearance by Mr. Gus Rance, candidate for the United States Congress, 3rd District. Mr. Rance, if you would, please state your name and address for the record, please.
Certainly. Gus Rance, 101 LaRue, France, Lafayette, Louisiana, 70508.
Thank you.
And I only have one daughter, unlike Jimmy, and she's done a number on my hair, so God bless them. Anyway, thank you all for having me here, give me the opportunity to introduce myself. My name is Gus Rance. I am running for U.S. Congress. I'm the only person running. I'd love to be able to tell you that, but that's simply not true. Now, why on earth would you want to do that? That's the first question I get. Why on earth would you want to put yourself through that hell up in D.C.? Well, like most of you, I'm fed up with our federal government, but I still believe in this great country. And I still believe in this great country because the life that I've lived truly defines the American dream. I was born in government-subsidized housing, son of a college dropout Vietnam veteran and a divorced teenage mother, both struggling to find their way in this world. And basically what that means is we were poor. But I didn't know it. Because unlike so many in this country, I was very blessed to have two loving parents who taught me through their faith and through their example that by working hard, getting an education, and dreaming big in this country, in America, anything is achievable. And it is. I was able to go to college on a baseball scholarship. I met an amazing lady, got married, went to law school, started a family, and then I started a business. And my business, like most, started very, very small. In my case, we were trying to save a single struggling hospital. A hospital in such bad shape, it was going to miss payroll if we didn't step in. And with a lot of help and a lot of mistakes, we saved that hospital anyway, and many others. And today, I employ nearly 2,000 amazing men and women all over this country. Unfortunately, the toughest part of my job was and continues to be navigating the ever-changing red tape and bureaucracy from our own government. See, successful businesses don't succeed because of a government permit or policy. At least they shouldn't. They don't require a brilliant Ivy League plan. They take a lot of hard work, a great team, and some common sense that most of us learn as children. And I'll share a story with all of you that's impacted my life. As a child, I remember grocery trips with my family. We had $35 to spend. So on every trip, we brought one of these. And for those of you young people in the audience, it doesn't play music, it doesn't play a video, it doesn't do anything else. It's simply a calculator. It was the most expensive thing we owned in my house at the time, and I was never allowed to play with it. But that's how we shopped. We'd go up and down the aisles. My mom would grab a package of hot dogs, throw it in the cart, and my dad would be punching in the price. My mom was in charge of the coupons, and Tuna Helper, I was told, was my favorite. I was told this because we had it on a very regular and recurring basis. But my mom would drop in the cart, and my dad would add it up. That's the way we shopped. It was a complex operation. You punch in the price, you subtract the coupons, and you figure the tax. We had $35. We were on a budget, and we couldn't go over because there was no money. Today, the federal government has that same $35 to spend. It's our money. But they spend $300. And that's why we have a federal debt that's $19.5 to $20 trillion, depending upon who you talk to, and growing each and every single day. And that trillion word doesn't mean much, so I'll put it in perspective for you. Imagine every person in this room and every other room in America has basically a $60,000, let's say, credit card bill. How hard is it to buy a house, a car, a washing machine with that kind of debt burden? And as worried as we are about ISIS and Iran and our infrastructure and the energy, they're all very real issues. The national debt is our single greatest national security threat. If we don't get our debt under control, we won't have the money to protect our nation. In fact, we won't have the money to fund any program that you might think is worthwhile. So when I go to Washington, this calculator is going to sit on my desk every day as a constant reminder of what I learned as a child and what big government officials still haven't learned, that all over our community, families just like mine did live on a budget, and they have to find ways to make ends meet. And our government is tasked with the exact same thing. This country needs real leadership. We need accountability. We need to find our moral compass. I'm running for office to take power back from the lobbyists and lifers that are in Washington, D.C. Everyone in this room has the power on November 8th to help me do that. Speeches don't solve problems. I'm aware of that. Speeches don't put people to work. Actions do. And that's why I'm running for office. It's time we elected an accomplished U.S. representative, one who has actually lived and worked under the laws and policies the bureaucrats have created for us. I've never been in any office, but I'm running for Congress because I'm fed up. I'm mad that no one cares about our mountains of debt and that red tape is strangling the life out of hardworking Americans and American businesses. I'm fed up that for all the money we spend and all the taxes we pay, our government's not protecting us or our veterans, that our border policy leaves us vulnerable to terrorist attacks, and illegal immigration we choose not to control. Most importantly, that at every turn, the American people are not a priority for our elected and appointed officials. In 2016, this is why we're all fed up, and this is why I'm running to be your next congressman. This district deserves first-class representation from someone who actually wants the job, not just the title. My name is Gus Rance. I need your help and your vote. And as Jimmy said, tell all your friends. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to introduce myself.
Thank you, Mr. Rance. Are there any questions from Mr. Rance from the jury? Thank you for being here. Good luck. Item 6, appearance by Mr. Mike Francis, candidate for Public Service Commission in the 4th District. Mr. Francis, if you would, please state your name and address for the record, please.
Michael Gordon Francis, 782 Jasmine Road, Crowley, Louisiana, 70526. I'm here to ask for your vote for Public Service Commissioner. I was born and raised up in LaSalle Parish, Gina, Louisiana. This area has 17 parishes in it, 1 million people. And man, it's a lot of work, a lot of ground to cover. I've come here today to ask for your vote because of my experience. And let me explain. My wife is from Lake Charles here. Met her out here on Sale Road. She was 18, I was 21. She was a graduate of LaGrange High School. When I was 30 years old, I started business in the oil and gas industry. That's something I had done since I was 18. I started business with one truck, one driver. The truck was mine, and I was the driver. I built that business up to almost 500 employees, over 200 18-wheelers, at 20-some-odd locations all the way from Rock Springs, Wyoming to the mouth of the Mississippi. We had 8 locations on the Gulf Coast serving the offshore industry. Also, we had a place here at the Port of Lake Charles, just about a mile over here. We worked with Mr. Bill Race. My company was the largest customer of the Port of Lake Charles. Very proud of that accomplishment. We had 20 acres of warehouse space there at the port, bringing in frac material from China and distributing all over the country in rail and trucks. While I was building this business over the last 30-some-odd years, like a lot of you guys and girls who elected the office, I got tired of sitting around griping about things and decided to get involved, and I ran for a state central committee in the Republican Party. I won that seat, and weren't many Republicans around Crowley then. That's when Edwin Edwards was governor. 2 years later, I was elected chairman of the Republican Party, and I served as the state chairman for 6 years. Now, I've said all that to come back to ask you to consider the experience in this job as Public Service Commissioner. My business background and my political background. Probably the toughest thing I ever did, though, in politics was herding up those Republicans. You know, it's like herding cats, you know. But we did it. We accomplished a lot. So I'd like for you to consider my experience, and I ask you to vote for experience, vote for a servant leader. Vote for Mike Francis. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Francis. Are there any questions? Mr. Francis? We have a question for you. Mr. Scott?
Just a quick statement, if you'll pardon my voice for a minute. You know, when we join this servanthood, I guess you call it, we want to serve people, we want to do things. You know, it's the little things that we do in life that I think affect people the most. And one of the things I've been able to tell people for years and years when I tell this story is this is the first time you're going to hear this. But 25 years ago, I was driving back and forth to my Army Reserve unit in Lafayette. And all the time, I would read those scrolling signs on Francis Drilling Fluids, and it would always say something very, go get them. I call them resonators. And I'll always remember remember, I was trying to decide on if I was going to start a business. I had one new kid. What did I really want to do with my life? And I drove that morning. The sun was just coming up, and that sign said, "Why not go out on a limb? That's where the fruit is."
Amen.
And that resonated in my life all the way till today. And I've shared that story many, many a times. So it's the little things that we do that change people's lives. And I'll tell you, that sign and that quote, wherever it came from, I don't even know if you remember, but thank you for that.
Well, I'll put them all up, and thank you, Mr. Scott. And, you know, the most asked question that each of us get as political leaders is, why you do that, you know? I do it because of God and country. And I proved it with what I put on that sign and the accomplishments I've had in my business. And if you'll help me win this prize, I won't let you down. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Going to item 7, presentation of awards from the 2017 Road and Drainage Trust Fund Program. We have the City of Lake Charles for the Lake Street 4-laning, $500,000. Mr. Cardone, you want to come up? I guess we're going to have a photo op here. Sure. Yeah, Ward 3 jurors, if y'all want to step up, we'll take a picture.
Although y'all didn't do nothing. On this one. Yeah, who's on this one? Yeah, I'm gonna get out of the way. Sharp. You hear me? Jeez, is that too like make sure they're serious. Oh yeah. One, two. Oh hey, oh God. One, two, three. 1, 2, 3.
A lot of people say, we'll do Diamond Drainage Board 3.
Yeah, if the Ward 3 jurors would stay. Next, we have the Gravity Drainage District Number 4 of Ward 3, $500,000 for laterals L3 and L5 of W6. Mr. Green and Mr. Miller here representing the board. Mr. Miller up front.
Him. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Fix all the drainage with that.
Thanks to Mr. Miller and Mr. Green for their service on the board. Next, we have Gravity Drainage District Number 7 of Ward 8, L14 main improvements, $500,000.
500.
The juror from Ward 8
Yeah,
would
you're
come
in
up.
district.
One, two, three. That's the one I thought was for me. 1, 2, 3.
After a tornado.
Oh, he got you good.
Okay, item 8, take appropriate action on applications for liquor and beer permits. Mr. Crane.
Mr. President, we have one special event, 2 new, and 20 renewals. We recommend they be approved.
So move.
Got a motion by Mr. Anderpont and a second by Mr. Guidry. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 9, consideration of approving payment of all current invoices.
Move on 9.
Got a motion by Mr. Collins, second by Mr. Guidry. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 10, consideration of approving the
Move on
minutes of the
10.
regular
Second.
meeting of the police jury dated September 22nd, 2016. I have a motion by Mr. McMillan and a second by Mr. Guidry. Is there any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 11, consideration of approving the parish-wide drainage liaison committee report dated October 11th, 2016. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Parish-wide Drainage Liaison Committee met on Tuesday, October 11, 2016, and received a report and recommendations from the staff regarding an update on the parish-wide drainage study. Staff presented an update on this initiative, including a report on the results of the public outreach and stakeholder engagement process, and made recommendations to move forward with the initiative to further address both current and long-term needs for drainage. The committee voted unanimously to recommend that the police jury approve the following staff recommendations. Adoption of the drainage policy framework. Move forward with the Calcasieu Drainage Coalition, working with municipalities and drainage districts to develop complementary policies throughout the parish, related development ordinances, and determine the next steps on capital projects and related funding. That is my report, and I'll move to discuss or move to approve.
Got a motion approved by Mr. Scott.
Second.
Second by Mr. Brain.
I'd like to vote no on that motion.
Okay. I was going to, before we actually voted, I was just going to make it very clear. This is, all we're doing at this point is moving forward to try to create the ordinances and the changes to the ordinances, and nothing else. We're not voting on any policy changes tonight. It's only a thing to move forward. If we don't move forward, then everything remains like it is, which we all know we have drainage problems, and we really don't want things to remain as they are. We want to try to fix them. And there will be many more meetings, public meetings, outreach meetings for all the stakeholders to give us their ideals in forming these ordinances, so that there'll be a lot of time for public input as we work through this in the next few months. With that said, I guess, is everybody clear? We had a motion and a second. Is there any objections?
Except for one.
Ms. Trimmy wants to be noted as voting against. Anyone else, or do we need a roll call?
No.
There's no other objections, Ms. Kathy.
Okay, thank you.
Motion carries.
Is there anyone here who would like to speak on it?
No, ma'am.
We don't have any blue slips. We don't have any, no.
Mr. White?
One thing I'd like to say, thank you, Mr. President. The last meeting, I wasn't able to attend, but I did watch it. And Mr. Beam, like you said in that meeting, it's our responsibility to listen and learn the needs of our constituents in our parish and our district. We as a group are listening. We're learning every day, and we're learning because of the constituents that are calling in, writing in, and telling what they would like to see. And like as many in this room, I am a dad of 2 kids, and I'm still alive. And it's the future of my kids that I'm worried about, and grandkids, with these ordinances that we do put in place. And there is clarification. I've sat down with Mr. Allen and wanted him to kind of clarify a few things about new development and old development, and these impervious surface fees. We do have a problem in our parish, and I don't want to continue to kick the can down the road 10, 20 years from now for my kids to have to deal with it, my grandkids to have to deal with it. We have to deal with it now, and I know there's things that we have to put in place that many people's not going to like, but we have to clarify better on what that is. And with that being said, Mr. Allen, can you tell us and clarify one more time about, well, I say one more time, we're going to probably have to clarify it many more times, but for a new development, when we build a retention pond, detention pond, the developer incurs that cost, which in turn goes to the resident that buys the piece of property. With the retention pond being built, the the fees that a homeowner, will they acquire or occur additional fees when they go in and want to build a house or build a shop or put a driveway in? Can you explain that and clarify that a little better?
I'll be happy to, Mr. White, and clarify that. You know, the shortest answer is no, you're absolutely right. There won't be a double fee. There's never been an intent to be any form of a double fee. So when a new development goes in and is built to the current standard, which in this policy that we're talking about is to, in essence, to not have any new runoff to the 25-year storm level. When they do that, then understand that that property that's being developed has been mitigated. It is done. It really doesn't need to be done again. So there wouldn't be no reason to charge a new fee on top of what has already been put in the ground to make that development neutral, if you would. So the fee is a fee in lieu of being able to do that in scenarios and cases where they can't accomplish that in a new development. Sometimes the lots are going to be too small to get that type of detention on. So the fee is fee in lieu of detention when needed. To be able to afford to go on the backside, if you would, and build regional detention ponds to help reduce flooding, you know, for lands that we can't mitigate on site. So I hope that helps. We absolutely want to make sure that we're not looking at any kind of double fee situation.
Thank you. And once again, I want to reiterate what Chris said. This meeting is just a vote to agree to move forward so that you can build some ordinances for us to come back to the board for us to vote on at a later date, correct?
Yes, sir, correct. This sets a heading that we need to work in, allows us to do the drafting with, you know, a heading in mind.
I yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Anderpont, you wish?
Thank you. I'll just be brief, Mr. President. Address Mr. Wainwright for just a moment, and we've covered this ground before, but I just, as a matter of record, want to be sure that the developers, the contractors, and all those involved where drainage is needed are going to be included, along with Gravity Drainage Board members and the municipalities where everybody is on board. If we don't do that, we're going to absolutely hit a stone wall, and I think it's imperative that those people be included in all the discussions from here on. And it's not, I'm not saying do it, I'm asking that you do it.
Well, I'm agreeing with you, Mr. Francis. I think that's going to be the key ingredient to getting good, consistent, workable policies parish-wide. You know, if this goes forward, then, you know, we will begin sending out those invitations for the first meetings to that group you just described, you know, next week, first thing. So it's going to, we fully intend to build it with what you just described, a coalition of people who are in the drainage field every day, developing this, finishing out this plan.
I yield back.
Thank you. Okay, had a motion, well, we had a motion second, we voted, one against. All right, item carries. Item 12, no action necessary, the case has been withdrawn. Item 13, take appropriate action on a request by Goldsmith Farms LLC to rezone from agriculture to single-family residential to allow residential development.
And zoning.
708 lots in Porter's Cove subdivision in the 2900 block of Clyde Delaney Road in Ward 1. I had a motion by Mr. Latour to uphold planning and zoning, and they voted unanimously to recommend that the request be granted, and a revised plat has been submitted wherein the number of proposed lots has been reduced to 682 instead of the 708. So I'm sure your motion includes that stipulation. Yes. Second by Mr. Collins. Is there any discussion? Any objections? Mr. White.
I didn't have a chance to actually look at the new plot plan that the developer submitted. I just want to make sure that what we discussed prior to the plan update, that the walking track is going to be included in this development. A green space in this development is still there, and covered ditches are there as well. Is that still happening?
I believe so, but I think the developer's here tonight. He may want to answer that question for you, Mr. White.
Would you like that, Mr. White?
Yes, if you don't mind.
Mr. Guidry, please state your name and address for the record, please.
Yes, sir. Cliff Guidry, 410 Gordon Crockett, Lafayette, 70508. Yes, that's correct. Everything is still as is.
All right, awesome. That's all I needed. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. White. Mr. Latour, you have a question?
I just wanted to tell you thank you for working with us and coming to a solution. I mean, you stepped up, the community had complaints, you corrected the problem. I just wanted to thank you for that.
Very welcome.
Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Guidry. Any other discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 14, take appropriate action on
Move
the
on
request
14.
by
Second.
Erica Jackson to rezone from mixed residential to manufactured home park to allow a manufactured home park of 3 spaces at 3129 East Burton Street in Ward 4. Planning and Zoning Board met on Tuesday, October 18, 2016, and voted unanimously to recommend that the request be granted with stipulations. Had a motion by Mr. McMillan, second by Mr. Barris, to uphold with stipulations. Is there any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 15, take appropriate action on a request by Gerald Lewis, edX, to rezone from agricultural to multifamily residential to allow a multifamily residential development of 20 units at 5004 Ryan Road in Ward 3.
Move to uphold
Planning and Zoning Board met on Tuesday,
Second.
October 18, 2016, and voted unanimously to recommend that the request be granted with stipulations. I have a motion by Mr. Brame and a second by Mr. Latour to uphold. Is there any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 16, there's no action necessary. The case has been withdrawn. Item 17, no action necessary. The case is withdrawn. Item 18, no action necessary. The case was deferred by Planning and Zoning. I guess we could have a...
No need.
No need. Item 19, take appropriate action on a request by Charles Goodman to rezone from mixed residential to light industrial to allow light industrial development. It's a storage yard at 213 Goodman Road in Ward 3. Planning and Zoning Board met on Tuesday, October 18, 2016, and voted unanimously to recommend that the request be granted with stipulations. I have a motion by Mr. Collins and a second by Mr. Barris to uphold. Is there any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 20, take appropriate action on a request by Tolco 2 LLC to rezone from general commercial to light industrial to allow
Move to
light
uphold.
industrial development
Second. With
of a warehouse in the 2900 block of East Napoleon Street in Ward 4. Planning and Zoning Board met on Tuesday, October 18, 2016, and voted unanimously to recommend that the request be granted with stipulations. I have a motion by Mr. Anderpont and a second by Mr. Gilry. Is there any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 21, take appropriate action on a request by Lavoy Land Company, LLC, to rezone from mixed residential and general commercial to multifamily residential and general commercial to allow multifamily residential development of 42 units and to allow general commercial development of restaurant and intensive recreational use at 5617 Common Street in Ward 3. Planning and Zoning Board met on Tuesday, October 18, 2016, and voted unanimously to recommend that the request be granted with stipulations. Had a motion by Mr. Scott, second by Ms. Mayo. Is there any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. You okay, Ms. Mayo?
Yes.
You were smiling down there.
Shit's by me.
Item 22, no action necessary. Case has been deferred by the Planning and Zoning Board. Item 23, presentation from staff and introduction of a proposed ordinance relative to the Louisiana Smoke-Free Air Act for consideration of adoption at the regular meeting on November 17, 2016. Mr. Boland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight we're here to really, for the first time, introduce you to an ordinance that we're going to recommend for final action at a later date. And usually when we bring ordinance to the jury, it's for a couple of reasons. Sometimes it conflicts with state law. Other times they're kind of outdated. And others are concerns or really a little bit more than concerns regarding an issue. I think it's safe to say in these revisions and this ordinance, a combination of all three. That being said, over the last year, I think many of you have been called, I know I have, about complaints about smoking, secondhand smoke, and really littering in your public parks and parish parks. And so as you see, we go through this brief presentation, which is only about 3 slides. I've got some bullet points. But you can see how we kind of arrived at the recommendations here tonight. The key to tonight is to introduce it, get some public feedback for the meeting in November, and really move on from there. So with that, I want to kind of go over some bullet points. Again, some of the things will not change. We will continue to adopt a Louisiana Smoke-Free Air Act, which I think is extremely important. That is kind of the things that we kind of move in line with the state. Also, it has no changes to private homes, bars, restaurants, any other private businesses, and I think that's extremely important as you move that. I think that the ordinance you will see will have no impact on any businesses or economic activity in the parish. One thing that's kind of different now, you have the vaping and you have, it's really not different, but tobacco. So what you'll see is they're all lumped into one category, tobacco, vaping, and then the smokeless tobacco. So what are the biggies? The biggies are that the ordinance is recommending that we have no smoking or vaping on any police jury-owned property. That's a little different from our ordinance now. You can smoke at the front doors of any downtown complex and any other parish-owned facility. The other biggie change to the ordinance or recommendation is no smoking in our parish parks. And that's a big one. And we've had a lot of complaints from citizens, not only on secondhand smoke, but the littering issue of cigarette butts. Kind of on a side note, over the last year, I think we've put out over 3 or 4 fires just in the landscaping around our downtown complex and our parish parks. And also the health unit complex is part of that. We do have designated smoking areas, particularly in our parks, RV spots. We heard some folks say, look, if I rent an RV spot or campsite, would that be a designated smoking area? And it will be. That's really the bullet points of it. There are penalties ranging from $100 for first offense to $25 for first offense to $100 for the third offense on that. But as you can see, we are not recommending changes other than our parish-owned facilities and our parks, basically. If you are to approve that in November, we hope that it will go effect January 1, 2017. With that, I'll take questions and comments.
Mr. Anderpont.
Thank you, Mr. President. Are you saying that the people who smoke, i.e. this building, are going to have to go across the street to smoke?
That's a great question. What we do is we will assign designated areas across the downtown complex. So not across the street. In this case, there'll be a area kind of cat-a-corner to the DA's office. There'll be one by the courthouse. There'll be one by 901. There'll be one back Magnolia. So there'll be several different locations across our complex that you can smoke.
I don't smoke, never have, but I do have family members who have in the past, but that's not the issue. The issue is I just want to be sure that we're not discriminating against anybody. And that's a privilege of a person. If they want to do that, fine, well, and good. It doesn't bother me. It bothers some people. Maybe they think it bothers them. I don't know. But I was just curious. I mean, when you said all police jury properties, that's a wide...
Yes, sir, and there'll be designated smoking areas. One thing when we started looking at the policy or the new ordinance, we thought about that. We wanted to make sure that we did have a spot for people to smoke. There are many businesses and hospitals who say no smoking whatsoever, and what happens is they end up on the streets. And I hate saying that, but they end up on the streets and sidewalks outside their locations. And we thought if we did that, that would happen here, and we do not want that. We want to have a spot where our folks can go and smoke.
Well, what you're saying is on all police jury-owned properties, but and then you come back and you say we'll have designated areas. I mean, let's get it clear tonight. Yes or no? I mean, they're going to be able to smoke somewhere on our property?
Excluding parks, as it stands today. But on our property or parish facilities, there will be designated areas for employees and customers to smoke.
Well, I think to me, it's ambiguous, and I think y'all need to relook at that and make sure that everybody's on the same page, because I'm really confused at what you're saying. No police jury property, but there'll be designated areas. To me, that's a contradiction of what you originally said.
We will look at that, yes, sir.
Hey, you're back.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew Pond. I just want to state again, this is only for consideration to be adopted at the regular meeting on November 17th. So, everybody's got some time to look at it, and I'm assuming everybody will get a copy of it.
Yes, sir.
You'll email it to us or what have you, and get us some time to look at it and ask questions. Mr. Brain.
Thank you. Dan, the parks, you said, just for clarification, there is going to be designated spots or no?
At the present time, we've talked about it. We will not have designated spots at the park, but that is up for discussion, and that's kind of some of the feedback we want to get back from the citizens.
Okay. I have a question on how are you going to enforce that ordinance in a park?
I think the biggest question we've been asked numerous times, how do you enforce that?
Yeah.
And I think that's a tough question, and we've looked at across the country how do you enforce it. First of all, I think it's a process. I think that with educating the public, educating our employees about downtown complex, and the more you get the word out, educate the public about no smoking in public parks, that plays into it. It's not realistic to say law enforcement is going to patrol the parks and hand out citations for people who are smoking. What usually happens in these type of ordinances is the citizen engagement really is the enforcer. And I say enforcer, as it moves through the process, they approach folks. And there's a lot of it working together, and there's a lot of us on our part that we've got to get out and educate the public on these new ordinances once you do approve anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good direction to go, I guess. I don't know, but I don't see. I'm just taking Prairie Lake Park and Calcasieu Point. Those are the two in my district, and I know there's groups that go out there and they get their blanket and that's they smoke and they do whatever. I don't, we can have the ordinance, but what good is the ordinance if we're not going to enforce it? Is what I guess is what I'm saying. And then you go to the boat launches. They're launching their boats, they're smoking and whatever.
It is a process that hopefully as we move through it with the education and the campaigns, and we will get better at that. But you're right, that is a tough component of that.
Does the park keepers have any, will they be able to do anything about it, or if they see somebody?
I would think that they could approach the person and ask them. One of the issues at the parks, it's not only the secondhand smoke, the cigarette butts and the littering at our parks is, I won't say out of control, but it's pretty bad. And most of our folks who provide maintenance out there spend most of the day trying to pick up cigarette butts. So there are some things that we need to work through, Mr. Brame.
Yeah.
And that is one of them.
Well, I guess it's a good thing to do, but I just don't see it working in the parks. It's going to be, you can't control it unless you enforce the ordinance and start writing citations all the time. And I'm not sure that's what we exactly want to do in a park, but that's just my opinion.
No, I think that will be brought back to the group, and we will look at all that
Okay.
and come back with your recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Brame. Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Boland, what is Ward 3 Recreation and City of Lake Charles's policy?
I'm not sure about Ward 3 Recreation. I know the City of Lake Charles and the Sulphur have kind of a hybrid of no smoking policy, 25 foot from an entrance to a door. I think Sulphur's is 5 or 10 feet from a secondary entrance. When it goes to parks, it's so many feet from playground equipment. I think in those cases, I'm sure they run into the same enforcement issues, and we debated that for a while, and we can go back and revisit it. But as we went around the downtown complex and really got out a measuring tape of 25 feet or 10 feet, it was really hard to enforce, and you'd almost have to go out there and draw lines across the downtown complex. And so that's why we stayed away from that. But in most of the other municipalities, it's maybe 10, 25 feet from playground equipment, certain items such as that.
And then what about the state of Louisiana at state parks? Do they have a policy?
No, they do not.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Hunter. Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am for this, Dane, and I'd like to tell you why. While I was serving on the board at the rec fields in Moss Bluff, we put an ordinance in about smoking. But we had to put an area to where the people would go. And with having that ordinance put in place, it gives the other people that didn't want to be around smoke, give them the opportunity to voice their concerns about people that were smoking. And that over time, people went to those designated areas. They got tired of hearing people complain and gripe, so they went to those designated areas, and it kept the smoke away from the kids. So it is a good thing. I don't necessarily think that writing tickets is going to be the answer to it as well, but it's going to be the people, because we have an ordinance put in place, it's going to be the people voicing their concerns that drives the people to go to those designated areas. So it is a good thing, but in the parks, I feel that we need some area for these people to go, because if you don't, they're just going to do it. So,
And we will look at that, Mr. White.
You're back.
Mr. White. Mr. Guidry.
Thank you, Mr. President. That was a good question asked by Mr. Hunter, and I noticed in the audience we have Mr. John Cardone here with the city. Could you explain maybe to us what you guys' policies are for us for what we're talking about, Mr. Cardone, if you like? Appreciate it, John.
Mr. Guidry, I don't have the exact numbers, but ours basically says you can't smoke in the building, got to be a certain distance from the front door. And at all of our facilities, we have designated smoking areas, and they're required to go to those areas. And there are penalties and fines, but typically, as Mr. White said, they kind of find their way. Typically, it enforces itself. People don't want to be around it. As long as you have designated smoking areas, those people go to it. But we do allow it at the locations and on site, but at designated areas.
Thank you, Mr. John. We appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Cardone. Is that all, Mr. Guidry?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a motion?
Move to accept.
Motion by Mr. Anderpont and a second by Mr. White. Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 24, consideration of adopting a resolution authorizing the resubmittal of an application to the State of Louisiana Office of Facility Planning and Control for fiscal year 2017-2018 capital outlay request for the gravity sewer trunk mains and pumping stations for South Ward 3 and South Ward 4 project in the amount of $30 million with $20 million in state capital outlay funding and $10 million in local funding.
Move on 24.
Motion by Mr. Brame, second by Mr. Guidry.
Wake up.
Is there any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 25, consideration of adopting a resolution
Move on 25.
consenting request by the city of Sulphur to allow the city to rezone recently annexed property located to the west of Prater Road from mixed residential to commercial with an exception for recreational use, which is in this case labor housing. Okay, we had a motion by Mr. McMillan, second by Mr. Guidry. Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Crane, is the city of Sulphur going to have a hearing about this as well?
I think, I'm not sure if they are. They're annexed to property, so I'm not sure.
I just found this kind of interesting. I'd never heard of this before.
Go ahead, Sam.
I can try. Mr. Hunter, their action has to come before ours. Their annexation of the property was done already. So now they must come, we must approve because the zoning restrictions are less restrictive than what they're trying to do. So that's why they're coming to us, and action is required by the police jury.
So they have already taken action on it?
Yes.
And there was a public hearing when they did that,
Yes.
obviously? Okay, thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Anderpont.
Thank you, Mr. President. Address Mr. Crane, please.
Yes, sir.
History has that they annexed the property, but they do not annex the roads. Am I correct?
I'm sorry, sir.
They annexed the property, but not the roads. The roads remain in the parish. Is that correct?
I believe in this case, they annexed up to the right-of-way. I'm not sure if they annexed into the center of the road. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Can we find that out?
Sure, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Do you need to know that before you vote on this?
Well, you just told me. No,
Oh.
I don't have to wait that long.
All right,
It's a matter of curiosity, Mr. President.
okay, I understand.
That's what killed the cat.
Yeah, be careful. We have a motion by Mr. McMillan and a second by Mr. Guidry. Is there any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 26, consideration of adopting a resolution approving a cooperative
Second.
endeavor agreement with the City of
Second.
Lake Charles for costs
Second.
associated with consulting services related to the development and implementation of an affordable housing strategy initiative, which is intended to address the projected housing needs in our region. Have a motion by Mr. Gilry and a second by Mr. Hunter.
Yes.
Did you ask to
Yes.
speak?
Yes.
Mr. Gilry.
Thank you. I guess, Brian, are we putting in just to have someone tell us we need more houses, or tell me there's more to it than that? Because everybody
We
knows
hope
that.
so, yes. Thank you, Mr. Gilroy. It is admittedly, affordable housing is very complicated to do. It's not, I will tell you this, it's not intended for the parish or the city of Lake Charles to build the housing. The idea is we need help on how to, Tarek's going to save me here. No, we need help on how to incentivize the private sector to build these. They have to make a profit. And of course, it's harder to at those levels, but there are things done in other parts of the country. So this firm, GCR, as well as there is a local person as a part of this that on behalf of the city and parish that will oversee it. We feel it's needed. I think y'all have seen some of the numbers that they're not projected, they're actual about housing demand, and it's a very serious case for people being displaced. So, yes, it'll be more than just token, but we don't know for sure the outcome. But
Is it 50/50?
you mean the cost share? Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
President.
Mr. Gilry. Mr. Scott.
Yeah, Mr. Beam, correct me, but last year, didn't the chamber do a large housing study with CSRS, and they put together this great internet tool and all that? Is that going to be used in this study, or is this group going to start something all fresh? Because I thought that was the intent of this. Who was it, CSRS that did that study with
Yes, and
chamber?
I think you're referring, it was very multifaceted, and there was what they call, I think, a housing model that allows you to plug in numbers. Tarek can correct me if, I'm pretty sure on this, the scope, this has taken a little longer than initially thought because the scope was bigger, where ultimately it was explained that we have some local resources such as that we can utilize that will lower the cost because they don't have to do all that. So yes, that and any other thing that came out of that study, which the Alliance contracted with CSRS, will be utilized and not duplicated.
If housing is such a big deal in the entire parish, why are we talking about Lake Charles and Calcasieu Parish? Why aren't we talking about Sulphur and Westlake and DeQuincy? Why so focused on just Lake Charles? And
Well, I don't believe it excludes them at all. It's just it was decided that it's not that large a cost, and just between Lake Charles and the parish to handle that part, but those cities will not be excluded from any of the study efforts.
so it will be more parish-wide?
Oh, yes, yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be very interested to see the results of this study. With the economic boom that we have, it's important that we remember there's people here, there's single mothers that are on a fixed income, there's retired individuals that are on a fixed income. So we cannot only be focused on the temporary labor housing problem, we've also got to be focused on the citizen of Calcasieu Parish problem when it comes to housing. So I'll be very interested to see the results of this, and I'm very happy, and I thank the City of Lake Charles for partnering with us on this, because this is a big issue, and we've got to keep our eye on the whole ball here, not just one part of it. So very, very supportive of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hunter. Mr. Scott.
Last question, what's the time frame? Because if it's important, I'm just curious What kind of time frame are we looking at?
If Tarek's still here, I need his help on that one.
Mr. Polite?
About 6 months before we're anticipating implementation.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Terry. All right, is there any further discussion? We had a motion on the floor. Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 27, consideration of adopting a resolution authorizing the submittal of a continuation grant application and any revisions thereafter to the Louisiana Commission on Law Enforcement in an amount up to $250,000 for the Truancy and Assessment Center program. I have a motion by Mr. Collins and a second by Mr. Guidry. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 28, consideration of authorizing the parish purchasing agent to advertise for bids.
Move on
as follows.
28, all bullets.
A,
Second.
sewer services for use by the Division of Engineering and Public Works and Wastewater. B, one Class 6 cab and chassis truck with a truck-mounted utility sign body. And C, one one-ton, four-wheel drive, four-door crew cab pickup truck. Got a motion by Mr. McMillan and a second by Mr. White. Is there any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 29, consideration of adopting a resolution invoking authority for a declaration of a public emergency for any procurement related to the purchase of the following.
29
A,
all bullets.
Repair
Second.
and/or replacement of the heating, ventilating, and air conditioning system and control system located at the Burton Coliseum Complex. And B, purchase and installation of a refurbished basketball court for use by the Burton Complex. Have a motion by Mr. McMillan and a second by Ms. Trimmy. Is there any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 30, consideration of accepting the Calcasieu Parish Sheriff's Office Facilities Automatic Transfer Switch Upgrades Project as substantially complete. Got a motion by Mr. Collins, a second by Mr. Latour. Is there any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Before we go to item 31, Mr. White, are you still in need of a personal point of privilege? Go
Yes.
ahead, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. As many as you may know, the Belfield Ditch Drainage Project was a very important drainage need in Ward 1. It started back on Phase 1 when Shannon Spell was sitting in this seat. It impacted a lot of people. To do this project, it needs different sources of funds are needed. One of them is capital outlay money. I'm very pleased to report that earlier today that the State Bond Commission approved the $910,000 in Priority 1 capital outlay funds that were designated in one legislative session earlier this year. I want to publicly thank Senator Ronnie Johns and Representative Stephen Dwight and all of the staff here for their diligence in helping get through this. State funds are very competitive in the capital outlay, and this would not have happened without everyone's efforts. And I want to say thank you to everyone involved.
Thank you, Mr. White. Item 31, consideration of going into executive session to discuss workers' compensation claim related to K.R. Laughlin.
Move to go in executive session.
Motion by Mr. McMillan, second by Mr. Guidry. We are now in executive session.
Log me out.